A chilling silence often precedes the most profound horrors. Imagine, for a moment, the hum of a bustling city, a vibrant tapestry of lives intertwined, suddenly pierced by the agonizing shriek of a mother, a sound that echoes not just through the streets, but through the very soul of a community. Atlanta, Georgia, a beacon of progress and hope for the Black community in the late 1970s, found its dreams dissolving into a nightmare, one child at a time. Between 1979 and 1981, the city became a hunting ground, its innocence brutally snatched away by an unseen, malevolent force. Over 2 years, a terrifying pattern emerged. Children, mostly young Black boys, vanished without a trace, only to reappear as grim statistics, their short lives extinguished, their futures stolen. Their disappearances were not random acts of violence. They were links in a chain of terror that gripped the city in a cold, unyielding embrace. This is the story of a community under siege, a police force scrambling for answers, and the controversial arrest that stunned a nation. This is the story of the Atlanta child murders, a cold case allegedly solved, yet one that continues to haunt the collective consciousness of a city and a people who, even after the verdict, wrestled with the unsettling question, was true justice ever really served, or did the true horror remain hidden, just beyond the reach of the law? Before we dive deep into the harrowing details of this case, tell us in the comments below, from which part of the world are you watching this story unfold? Your engagement helps us bring more untold mysteries to light, so please consider subscribing to our channel and joining our growing community. Atlanta, a city synonymous with the civil rights movement, a place where the dream of racial equality had taken root and blossomed into tangible political and economic power, found itself staring into an abyss of unimaginable fear. By the late 1970s, it was proudly touted as the Black Mecca, a metropolis led by a Black mayor, Maynard Jackson, and boasting a thriving Black middle class. Yet, beneath the veneer of progress, deep fissures of poverty, inequality, and racial tension persisted, a silent undercurrent in a city striving for unity. It was into this complex tapestry that terror began to weave its chilling threads. The year was 1979. The crisp autumn air had just begun to replace the oppressive summer humidity when the first whisper of fear began to circulate through the city's South Side neighborhoods. On July 28th, Edward Smith, a 14-year-old boy, was reported missing. 2 days later, Alfred Evans, also 14, vanished from a different part of the city. These initial disappearances, though alarming to their families, were initially treated as isolated incidents, perhaps runaways, common enough occurrences in any large urban center. The police, accustomed to dealing with the transient nature of some of the city's youth, initially assigned minimal resources. Yet, a disquieting sense of unease settled over the families in the predominantly Black working-class communities. Then, on September 15th, the grim reality began to manifest. The decomposing body of Edward Smith was discovered in a wooded area near the South River. His cause of death was undetermined, leaving more questions than answers. Less than 2 weeks later, Alfred Evans' remains were found nearby, having suffered a similar, inexplicable fate. The unsettling realization began to dawn. These were not runaways. These were victims. Their lives had been brutally cut short, and a shadow, cold and predatory, had fallen over Atlanta. The fear, once a mere whisper, grew into a guttural moan that echoed through the projects and quiet residential streets. Parents began to hold their children closer, their eyes scanning the streets with a newfound, desperate vigilance. The simple act of sending a child to the corner store, once a mundane chore, became an act fraught with terrifying risk. The grim calendar of disappearances and discoveries continued its relentless march. The autumn of 1979 yielded more heartache. On October 21st, 9-year-old Yusef Bell vanished after leaving his grandmother's apartment to buy sugar. His body was found on November 8th in an abandoned school building, suffocated. The distinct horror of a young child's murder sent a seismic shockwave through Atlanta. This was no longer just about two teenagers. It was about innocence itself being desecrated. The city's collective breath hitched in its throat. A pattern was emerging, one so heinous it dared not be named openly. Black children were being targeted. The local media, initially slow to connect the dots, now began to dedicate more attention, yet the full gravity of the situation was still underestimated by many outside the directly affected communities. The winter of 1979 and the spring of 1980 brought no respite, only an escalation of the nightmare. Angel Lanier, 12, disappeared on March 4, 1980. Her body was found 6 days later, strangled. Jeffrey Mathis, 10, vanished on March 11th. His skeletonized remains were found a year later. Eric Middlebrooks, 14, disappeared on May 18th, his body discovered in a wooded area, beaten to death. The list grew longer, a macabre roll call of stolen futures. Each name added another layer to the community's terror, fueling rumors and suspicions. Some whispered of a serial killer, a monster lurking in the shadows. Others, remembering the city's fraught racial history, pointed fingers at the Ku Klux Klan, suggesting a racially motivated campaign of terror. The historical memory of racial violence in the South ran deep, and for many Black Atlantans, the idea of external white supremacist involvement felt chillingly plausible, even logical, given the perceived lack of urgency from law enforcement in the initial stages. The official response, initially fragmented and under-resourced, began to coalesce under mounting public pressure. Mayor Jackson, acutely aware of the simmering distress and the horrific impact on his constituency, formed a special task force. The FBI was eventually called in, bringing sophisticated forensic techniques and investigative experience. However, the early days of the investigation were plagued by a desperate lack of leads, a frustrating void of eyewitnesses, and a horrifying absence of clear forensic evidence from the initial crime scenes. Many of the bodies, discovered weeks or months after the disappearances, were too decomposed to yield concrete clues about the manner of death or the perpetrator. The city was drowning in fear, a palpable, suffocating blanket that descended with the setting sun. Playgrounds emptied early, parents formed neighborhood watch groups, their faces etched with anxiety as they patrolled their streets, flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. The vibrant hum of Atlanta had been replaced by a low, mournful thrum of dread. The political tightrope Mayor Jackson walked was precarious. He was the first Black mayor of a major southern city, a symbol of progress, yet he faced the horrifying reality of his city's most vulnerable population being systematically preyed upon. He battled internal bureaucratic inertia within the police department, which, despite its growing number of Black officers, still suffered from historical issues of racial bias and under-resourcing in predominantly Black neighborhoods. Jackson's task force, initially named the Special Task Force on Missing and Murdered Children, struggled with its mandate. Resources were stretched thin. Officers, many inexperienced in serial murder investigations, faced overwhelming caseloads. The constant tension between local authority and the federal government, with the FBI initially hesitant to declare a serial killer due to jurisdictional nuances and profiling challenges, further complicated matters. The FBI's initial profile suggested a white perpetrator, a theory many in the community readily accepted given the history of racial violence. This early profile clashed sharply with the eventual arrest, deepening the skepticism for many. Meanwhile, the community did not sit idly by. Mothers like Camille Bell, Willie Mae Mathis, and Venus Taylor, their lives shattered by loss, became fierce advocates. They organized marches, held candlelight vigils, and pounded on the doors of City Hall, demanding action. They wore red ribbons as a symbol of their grief and their unwavering commitment to finding justice, transforming a silent symbol into a rallying cry that echoed across the nation. They formed the Committee to Stop Children's Murders, a grassroots organization that raised funds, coordinated searches, and became a powerful, undeniable voice for the victims. These mothers, united by unimaginable pain, were a constant, visible reminder to the authorities that these were not just statistics, but beloved children whose lives mattered. Their collective sorrow and outrage forced the city to confront the depth of its crisis. The spring and summer of 1980 were particularly brutal. The disappearances accelerated, claiming children as young as 7-year-old Latonia Wilson, who vanished on June 22nd, though her body was never found. Darren Glass, 10, disappeared on September 14th, his body discovered a year later. The psychological toll on the city was immense. The collective psyche of the Black community was fracturing under the strain. There was a profound sense of abandonment, a feeling that if these children were white, the city, the nation, would have mobilized with far greater urgency. This perception, whether entirely accurate or a product of historical trauma, deepened the chasm of distrust between the community and the authorities. Activists, community leaders, and the families of the victims began to openly criticize the police, accusing them of incompetence, apathy, or worse, complicity. The rumors and theories escalated into a cacophony of fear. The KKK theory, initially a whisper, grew into a roar for many. Stories circulated of mysterious white vans seen in Black neighborhoods, of shadowy figures attempting to abduct children. Some even claimed to have seen KKK literature or symbols near crime scenes, though these reports were often unsubstantiated. The lingering memory of the civil rights era and the terror of bombings and assassinations perpetrated by white supremacists made this theory resonate deeply within a community that had historically faced systematic oppression and violence. For many, it was easier to believe that an external, racist force was attacking their children than to grapple with the possibility of a monster from within their own community. Other theories, equally terrifying, emerged. A network of child pornographers preying on the vulnerable, or even a satanic cult, given the varied and often inexplicable nature of some of the deaths and disappearances. Investigators were overwhelmed with tips, many of them leading to dead ends, further taxing already strained resources and creating a sense of chaotic desperation within the task force. As the body count climbed towards the double digits, the world began to take notice. National news networks descended upon Atlanta, their cameras capturing the grief-stricken faces of mothers and fathers, the somber press conferences, and the palpable fear gripping the city. Celebrities, from Frank Sinatra to Sammy Davis Jr., held benefit concerts to raise funds for the families and the investigation. Muhammad Ali offered a reward for information. President Ronald Reagan authorized federal funding, a crucial turning point that finally brought significant resources to bear on the case. Yet, despite the increased attention and resources, the killer remained elusive, a ghost in the urban landscape. The theories diversified. Some now suggested a network of child pornographers, others a satanic cult preying on the most vulnerable. The air was thick with speculation, fear, and a desperate yearning for answers. The year 1981 dawned with a chilling continuation of the terror. Patrick Rogers, 16, disappeared on January 30th, his body found in February. Luby Getter, 14, vanished on January 3rd, his body discovered in April. The total number of victims, including those confirmed and those still missing but presumed murdered, now approached 24. The methods of disposal varied, but the pattern of targeting young Black individuals remained consistent. The investigators, under immense pressure, began to focus intensely on forensic evidence, particularly fibers found on some of the victims' bodies. These fibers, often microscopic, became the silent witnesses to a monstrous crime spree, holding the potential to link the perpetrator to his victims. This seemingly innocuous detail would ultimately become the linchpin of the entire investigation and later the subject of intense debate. The big break, or what was hoped to be one, came in the spring of 1981. The discovery of several victims' bodies in or near the Chattahoochee River, often dumped from bridges, led law enforcement to implement a radical surveillance strategy. They would stake out the bridges crossing the river at night, hoping to catch the killer in the act of disposing of a body. The nights were long, cold, and nerve-wracking for the officers perched in their hidden positions, their eyes scanning the dark flowing water, listening for any unusual sound. The city held its breath, praying for a breakthrough, yet dreading the discovery of another victim. For weeks, officers endured the chilling stillness of the pre-dawn hours, battling exhaustion and the gnawing anxiety that the killer might strike again just out of their sight. For weeks, officers endured the chilling stillness of the pre-dawn hours, battling exhaustion and the gnawing anxiety that the killer might strike again just out of their sight. The mental and physical toll on the surveillance teams was immense, a quiet heroism playing out nightly as they faced the unknown. Then, in the early hours of May 22, 1981, at 2:53 a.m., a splash was heard beneath the James Jackson Parkway Bridge. Officers immediately noticed a white 1970 station wagon speeding away from the scene. A patrol car, discreetly positioned, pulled over the vehicle a short distance from the bridge. The driver was identified as Wayne Bertram Williams, a 23-year-old black man. Williams presented himself as a music promoter and freelance photographer, explaining his presence at that unusual hour by claiming he was on his way to an audition with a singer named Cheryl Johnson, whose house he couldn't locate. The officers noted his demeanor, his story, and the presence of various items in his car, including a nylon rope and a camera. Williams was questioned but released. There was no body found in the river at that moment and no immediate evidence to hold him. However, the encounter was duly noted, and Williams became a person of intense interest to the task force. His car was placed under surveillance. 2 days later, on May 24th, the body of Nathaniel Cater, a 27-year-old man, was pulled from the Chattahoochee River. Just a few hundred yards downstream from the Jackson Parkway Bridge, he had been strangled. Another victim, Jimmy Ray Payne, 21, had been found in the river a month earlier. Both men were older than most of the previous child victims, though they were still part of the economically vulnerable population that had been targeted. The discovery of Cater's body so soon after the bridge incident solidified Williams as the prime suspect. The task force now had a face, a name, and a vehicle. The intensive surveillance on Wayne Williams began in earnest. Every move he made, every person he met was documented. He was followed relentlessly, a constant shadow, an omnipresent gaze. The pressure on Williams was immense, an unrelenting psychological siege designed to break him. He responded with a mixture of defiance and a peculiar, almost theatrical cooperation. He invited reporters to his home, granted interviews, proclaiming his innocence with an air of aggrieved dignity. He even failed a polygraph test, though these results are generally inadmissible in court. The cat-and-mouse game between Williams and his trackers became a legend within the force. He seemed to know he was being watched, sometimes driving erratically, making sudden stops, or even leading his tails on long, pointless detours, as if playing a twisted game. His calm, almost arrogant demeanor baffled and enraged the officers, who were convinced they had their man. The investigators began to piece together Williams' background. He was born and raised in Atlanta, the son of 2 teachers. He was a child prodigy of sorts, skipping grades, graduating high school early, and attending Georgia State University. He had a fascination with law enforcement, even setting up his own amateur radio station to monitor police frequencies. He lived at home with his parents, a somewhat isolated figure who struggled to maintain consistent employment, pursuing various entrepreneurial ventures with limited success, often involving talent scouting for aspiring musicians. He was known to frequent the same disadvantaged neighborhoods where many of the victims had lived, purporting to scout for talent or offering odd jobs. His profile, once considered, fit an emerging pattern, a seemingly ordinary man blending into the community, yet harboring a dark secret. Williams projected an image of sophistication, often carrying expensive camera equipment or talking about grand music deals, but his reality was one of limited achievement and a reliance on his parents. This disconnect, many observed, was a key to understanding his complex psyche. The linchpin of the case against Williams, however, rested not on direct eyewitness accounts or a confession, but on something far more subtle and, to many, controversial: fiber evidence. Forensic experts began meticulously examining the dozens of carpet and textile fibers found on the victims' bodies. The analysis became an exercise in painstaking detail, comparing microscopic strands. Eventually, investigators honed in on a rare type of green-yellow nylon carpet fiber and distinct purple fibers. These fibers, according to prosecution experts, were traced back to the Williams family home. The green-yellow fibers allegedly matched the carpet in Wayne Williams' bedroom. The purple fibers were said to match carpeting in the family's Chevrolet station wagon. Furthermore, dog hairs found on some victims were linked to the Williams family dog, a German Shepherd. The meticulous work of forensic specialists, particularly those from the Georgia State Crime Lab and the FBI's Fiber Analysis Unit, involved scanning electron microscopy, microspectrophotometry, and gas chromatography to analyze the chemical composition and physical characteristics of the fibers. They argued that the combination of colors, material composition, and manufacturing specifics made these fibers exceptionally rare, practically unique to the Williams residence and vehicle. The sheer volume and specificity of these fiber matches became the prosecution's central argument that the victims, in their final moments, had come into contact with Williams' environment. On June 21, 1981, Wayne Williams was arrested for the murders of Nathaniel Cater and Jimmy Ray Payne. The city of Atlanta erupted in a mixture of relief and profound shock. Relief because the terror had seemingly ended, a monster finally captured. Shock because the alleged killer was not a shadowy Ku Klux Klan member nor an outsider, but a young black man from within their own community, a seemingly unremarkable figure known to some, yet utterly alien to the collective fear he was now accused of embodying. The headline, Atlanta, Georgia, 1981, cold case solved, black community stunned by arrest, perfectly encapsulated this moment of bewildering revelation. Many in the black community had fervently believed in external involvement, a racist conspiracy. To have the perpetrator be one of their own challenged deeply held assumptions and beliefs, shaking the very foundations of their understanding of the evil that had plagued them. The trial of Wayne Williams began in January 1982. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Louis Slayton and Assistant District Attorney Jack Mallard, presented a largely circumstantial case, relying heavily on the overwhelming fiber evidence and the testimony of numerous forensic experts. They argued that the carpet in Williams' home, the carpet in his car, and even his family's dog were unique sources of the fibers and hairs found on the victims. They presented evidence that Williams had a history of preying on young boys and had lured victims with promises of music careers or modeling opportunities. The sheer statistical probability of such unique fibers appearing on so many victims, independent of Williams, was presented as infinitesimally small. Dr. Larry Peterson, a key FBI fiber expert, delivered meticulous, lengthy testimony explaining the science in detail, often using enlarged photographs of fiber cross-sections to illustrate his points. The state also introduced pattern evidence to link Williams to an additional 10 child murders, though he was only formally charged and tried for the murders of Cater and Payne. This strategic move, unprecedented at the time, allowed the prosecution to paint a chilling picture of a serial killer responsible for the entire reign of terror, effectively trying Williams for many murders he was not formally charged with. The strategy was to demonstrate a chilling modus operandi and establish Williams as the sole perpetrator of the entire murder spree. The defense team, led by attorney Alvin Binder and Lynn Whatley, vehemently attacked the fiber evidence, arguing that it was not as unique as the prosecution claimed, that it was susceptible to transfer, and that it was being misinterpreted. They brought in their own textile experts who testified that the types of fibers found were common in homes and vehicles across Atlanta, not unique to Williams. They highlighted the concept of secondary transfer, suggesting that fibers could be picked up from anywhere and transferred through casual contact, especially in a city where many people lived in similar housing projects or drove similar vehicles. They pointed to the lack of direct eyewitnesses, the absence of a confession, and the fact that many of the earlier child victims had been strangled by ligature, while Cater and Payne had manual strangulation marks, suggesting a potential difference in method. They questioned why, if Williams was indeed the killer of the younger children, the ligature method seemed to disappear. They pointed to the inconsistent investigative methods in the early stages of the case and questioned the thoroughness of the search for alternative suspects. Crucially, the defense also tapped into the simmering community resentment, arguing that Williams was a scapegoat, a convenient answer to a horrific problem that the city desperately wanted to close, especially given the intense national scrutiny and the racial politics at play. They suggested that the rush to convict Williams overlooked evidence that might have pointed to other perpetrators, perhaps even the long-suspected KKK. The defense painted a picture of a flawed investigation, marred by confirmation bias and a desire to appease a traumatized public. They even attempted to introduce testimony from alleged former KKK members about white supremacist plots, though this was largely disallowed by the court as unsubstantiated. The trial was a spectacle, an emotional roller coaster for the city and the nation. Each piece of evidence, each testimony was scrutinized under the harsh glare of public opinion. The courtroom was packed, tension palpable, as experts sparred over microscopic fibers, probabilities, and the intricacies of textile manufacturing. The victims' families sat in the front rows, their faces a mixture of hope, grief, and often skepticism. They had endured unimaginable suffering, and the idea that the city might simply close the book on their children's murders without absolute certainty was a bitter pill to swallow. The cross-examination of Williams himself was particularly charged, with prosecutors pressing him on inconsistencies in his numerous statements to police and media. Williams, ever composed, maintained his innocence, portraying himself as a victim of circumstances and a desperate city's need for a culprit. His calm and articulate responses, however, sometimes came across as evasive, further fueling suspicion. The climax of the trial arrived with the jury's deliberation, which stretched over 11 hours. The weight of an entire city, scarred by years of fear and loss, rested upon their shoulders. The courtroom, usually bustling with the quiet movements of clerks and the murmur of attendees, held its breath. The air crackled with a silent expectancy, a collective prayer for clarity, for an end to the agonizing uncertainty. When the verdict was finally read on February 27, 1982, the words reverberated with chilling finality: guilty. Wayne Williams was convicted of the murders of Nathaniel Cater and Jimmy Ray Payne. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. The pronouncement sent shockwaves through the courthouse and beyond, a cacophony of gasps, sobs, and a profound, complex sense of relief. For some families, a measure of peace finally arrived. For others, the doubts had only just begun to harden. In the aftermath of the conviction, law enforcement officials, including then Georgia Governor George Busbee and Mayor Andrew Young, who had succeeded Maynard Jackson, declared that the fiber evidence was so compelling that Williams was responsible for at least 23 of the 29 child murders. The remaining cases, where a link to Williams couldn't be definitively established, were largely attributed to him in spirit, and the task force was eventually dissolved. The city, traumatized and exhausted, collectively sighed. The reign of terror, it seemed, was over. The media narrative shifted from a city under siege to a city finding closure, however painful. But for many in the Black community, particularly the families of the victims, the resolution was far from complete. The declaration that the case was solved and Williams was the killer for the vast majority of cases brought a sense of official closure, but it failed to fully extinguish the embers of doubt that continued to smolder within the Black community. Many families still believed that Williams was a convenient scapegoat, a means to put an end to the public outcry and media frenzy. They pointed to the fact that Williams was only tried for 2 adult murders and never formally convicted of the child murders. They questioned the heavy reliance on circumstantial fiber evidence, arguing that a serial killer who targeted Black children might have been overlooked in the rush to judgment. The long-standing distrust of the predominantly white police force and the historical context of racial injustice made it difficult for many to accept the official narrative without reservation. They noted that the causes of death varied widely among the child victims, some strangled by hand, others by ligature, blunt force trauma, or undetermined. The age range also varied significantly from young children to teenagers, while Williams was convicted for the murders of 2 young adults. These inconsistencies, for many, pointed to the possibility of multiple perpetrators, or at least a more complex truth than a single individual. The theory of KKK involvement, or a broader white supremacist conspiracy, persisted in whispers and hushed conversations, a testament to the community's deep-seated anxieties and their sense that the true extent of the evil might never be fully acknowledged. Some mothers continue to protest, demanding that their children's cases remain open, refusing to accept the official pronouncements without a formal conviction specifically for their child's murder. Even decades later, these doubts refused to fade. Wayne Williams, from behind prison walls, continued to maintain his innocence, echoing the sentiments of those who believed he was wrongly convicted. He became a figure of controversy, giving interviews, filing appeals, and consistently denying his involvement in the child murders, even as he served his life sentence. His legal team consistently argued that the original investigation was flawed, tainted by racial bias, and that crucial evidence, including potential links to other suspects or groups, was ignored or suppressed. The persistence of Williams' denial, coupled with the continued lack of definitive, direct evidence for the child murders, kept the wound open for Atlanta. In 2019, nearly 40 years after the first disappearances, Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, herself a native Atlantan deeply affected by the historical trauma, announced that the city would re-examine evidence in the Atlanta child murders case. Her statement was a powerful acknowledgement of the lingering pain and unanswered questions, a tacit admission that for many, true closure remained elusive. Mayor Bottoms stated, "It is time, as many families have said, for us to review these cases one more time." This re-examination, focusing on new forensic technologies that might be able to extract DNA from previously untestable samples like hairs, clothing fibers, or biological fluids from the victim's garments, offered a glimmer of hope for a definitive answer. The city collaborated with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation and the Fulton County District Attorney's Office to conduct a fresh look at the decades-old evidence carefully preserved in storage. Yet it also underscored the profound uncertainty that had haunted the case for generations. The hope was that modern DNA analysis, far more precise and powerful than the technology available in the 1980s, could either definitively link Williams to more victims or perhaps identify new perpetrators, finally bringing irrefutable answers. The logistical challenges were immense, from ensuring the chain of custody of old evidence to the degradation of biological samples over time, but the moral imperative to seek the truth for the victims and their families remained paramount. The process of re-examining evidence decades after a crime is a daunting one, fraught with scientific and ethical hurdles. Foremost among them is the degradation of biological material. DNA, while robust, is not immortal. Exposure to elements, improper storage, and even repeated handling can diminish its integrity or render it unusable. Scientists in 2019 faced the monumental task of sifting through hundreds of items of clothing, blankets, and other potential evidence, much of which had been stored in less than ideal conditions for nearly 40 years. The goal was to identify samples large enough or well-preserved enough to yield a viable DNA profile, a needle in a haystack of aged fabrics and microscopic debris. New techniques, such as massively parallel sequencing, offered a chance to extract information from even minute or degraded samples that would have been impossible in the 1980s. But even with these advances, the success was not guaranteed. Each positive identification would be a painstaking process, requiring meticulous verification and comparison against databases. Beyond the technical challenges, there was the ethical weight of potentially re-traumatizing families, reopening old wounds without a guarantee of closure. The authorities had to navigate these sensitivities with extreme care, ensuring that families were informed and supported throughout the process, even if the results were inconclusive. For the surviving families, the announcement of the re-examination was a complex emotional cascade. For some, like Catherine Leach, mother of Curtis Walker, it ignited a fragile hope that her son's case might finally be definitively solved, bringing peace that a lifetime of doubt had denied her. "I just hope they find something," she was quoted saying, her voice a mix of weary resignation and desperate longing. This hope was often tempered by cynicism born from decades of disappointment. They had seen official declarations come and go, appeals rejected, and their pleas for further investigation often ignored. The idea that after so long, new answers might emerge was almost too good to be true for some. Others, having already accepted the official narrative or at least made their peace with it, felt a resurgence of their grief, a painful reminder of children they had lost and the terrifying years they had endured. The re-examination, while a necessary step for justice, forced them to relive the nightmare once more, to reread the newspaper clippings, to confront the memories of empty beds and unanswered questions. It was a double-edged sword, the promise of truth, but also the certainty of renewed pain. Wayne Williams, from the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification State Prison, responded to the re-examination with a characteristic blend of defiance and media engagement. He reiterated his long-standing claims of innocence, asserting that the new investigation would only serve to prove he was a scapegoat. His legal team, consistent in their decades-long fight, seized upon the opportunity to emphasize their arguments that the original investigation was flawed and incomplete. They contended that if the new forensic analysis revealed anything other than Williams' DNA, it would be a vindication of their client's position and a testament to the systemic failures of the original inquiry. Williams himself, a man who had always sought to control his narrative, continued to grant interviews, maintaining his articulate and seemingly composed demeanor, even as he languished in prison. His persistent denial, unwavering for over 40 years, remained a powerful counter-narrative to the official stance, fueling the doubts of those who questioned his guilt. The enduring theory of Ku Klux Klan involvement or a broader white supremacist conspiracy warrants deeper consideration, as it was a dominant belief within the Black community for understandable historical reasons. Atlanta, despite its progressive image, was still a southern city deeply scarred by generations of racial violence. The KKK had a documented presence in Georgia, and their history of targeting Black citizens was well known. For many, the idea that white supremacists would attack Black children was tragically consistent with their lived experience and the historical context of racial terror in America. Whispers circulated of white vans seen in Black neighborhoods at unusual hours, of sightings of suspicious white men, and even alleged KKK literature found near some crime scenes, though these reports were often dismissed as rumors or lacked substantiation in the official investigation. The FBI's initial profile suggesting a white perpetrator, later seemingly abandoned when Williams was identified, further cemented this suspicion for many. Critics of the official narrative argued that the possibility of KKK involvement was not thoroughly investigated because it would have been politically inconvenient and perhaps too explosive for a city eager to showcase its racial harmony. The idea that the murders were the work of a single Black perpetrator, Williams, offered a more contained and palatable solution than acknowledging a potential resurgence of organized racial terrorism. Some even speculated that the cleanup of crime scenes, the removal of bodies from initial abduction sites, could suggest a more organized effort than a lone individual. This theory, though never officially substantiated in court, represented a profound distrust in the justice system's willingness to pursue white perpetrators against Black victims, a sentiment rooted deeply in the painful history of the American South. Related to this was the theory of multiple perpetrators. The defense during Williams' trial had alluded to this, pointing to the varied causes of death and the wide age range of the victims. While the prosecution argued Williams was responsible for all, linking him through pattern evidence to 10 additional cases, the formal charges were only for 2 adult male victims. The fact that many of the children were killed by ligature, while Catter and Payne were manually strangled, raised questions. Was it possible that the Atlanta child murders was not the work of one serial killer, but rather a series of horrific crimes committed by several different individuals, perhaps some known to the victims, or even a fragmented network? The sheer geographical spread of the disappearances and body discoveries also hinted at a more complex scenario. The swiftness with which the task force was dissolved after Williams' conviction and the official closing of the remaining child murder cases left many feeling that a comprehensive search for other potential perpetrators had been prematurely abandoned. This narrative that the city moved too quickly to consolidate all the terror onto one man remains a powerful undercurrent of skepticism. The political pressure on Atlanta's leadership during this crisis cannot be overstated. Mayor Maynard Jackson carried the immense weight of being the first Black mayor of a major southern city, tasked with protecting a community he represented while simultaneously trying to maintain the city's image as a beacon of progress. His efforts to secure federal funding, push for increased police resources, and manage the fraught relationship between local and federal authorities were Herculean. The national spotlight on Atlanta meant that failure to solve the case was not just a local tragedy, but a national embarrassment, potentially undoing years of progress in race relations. When Wayne Williams was arrested and convicted, it offered a narrative of success and competence, a necessary closure for a city on the brink. This political imperative for a resolution, some argue, may have inadvertently contributed to the tunnel vision that focused solely on Williams, possibly at the expense of exploring other leads more vigorously. The need for a culprit and a swift end to the reign of terror was paramount, and Williams, with his peculiar behavior and the incriminating fiber evidence, became that answer. Wayne Williams' psychological profile, as presented by the prosecution and perceived by many, was that of a narcissist with a carefully constructed facade. He was intelligent, articulate, and often sought attention, inviting media into his home, even while under intense suspicion. He appeared to derive satisfaction from outwitting his pursuers, the cat and mouse game with surveillance teams feeding into his sense of superiority. This projection of confidence and even arrogance, juxtaposed with the reality of his limited professional success and continued dependence on his parents, suggested a deep-seated insecurity and a craving for recognition. For the prosecution, his sophisticated yet evasive demeanor was chilling evidence of a calculating killer. For the defense and his supporters, it was simply the behavior of an innocent man under an unprecedented level of scrutiny, fighting for his life against overwhelming odds. The ambiguity of his personality, his ability to present different faces to different people, made him a compelling, if deeply unsettling figure at the center of this tragedy. The legacy of the Atlanta child murders permeates the very fabric of the city's identity. Beyond the unresolved questions, the murders irrevocably altered a generation of Atlantans. For children who grew up during those years, the world became a more dangerous place, the carefree innocence of childhood stolen by a pervasive fear. Parents passed on cautionary tales, shaping how future generations viewed safety, trust, and community. The city has made significant efforts to memorialize the victims, with plaques, exhibitions, and educational initiatives, ensuring that their short lives and the collective trauma are never forgotten. These acts of remembrance are not just about honoring the dead, but also about acknowledging the enduring pain and the community's resilience in the face of unspeakable evil. Atlanta continues to grapple with this dark chapter, seeking to learn from the past while striving for a future where such horrors are never repeated. The nature of justice in the Atlanta child murders case remains a profound, unsettling question. If justice is defined solely by a legal conviction and the end of a crime spree, then for many, justice was served with Wayne Williams' incarceration. However, if justice demands absolute certainty, a complete understanding of motives, and accountability for every single life lost, then the Atlanta child murders remain an open wound. The heavy reliance on circumstantial fiber evidence, while scientifically robust for the time, always left room for interpretation and doubt, especially in a case so laden with racial politics and historical distrust. The legal truth of Williams' guilt, established by a jury, clashed with the emotional truth felt by many families and community members who saw a narrative constructed to provide closure rather than an exhaustive pursuit of all possible perpetrators. This tension between legal finality and lingering questions forces a painful reflection on what societies are willing to accept as solved when the stakes are so incredibly high. The media's role in shaping the national narrative was significant. Initially, the story of missing Black children in Atlanta was slow to gain traction, a reflection of systemic biases in news coverage. But as the body count climbed and community activism intensified, the national and international spotlight became unavoidable. News crews descended, capturing the grief and fear, transforming a local tragedy into a national crisis. After Williams' arrest and conviction, the media largely shifted to a narrative of resolution, celebrating the closure brought by law enforcement. However, this simplified narrative often failed to fully capture the complex doubts and divisions within the Black community, perpetuating a vision of a solved case that many Atlantans simply did not share. The sound bites of official pronouncements often overshadowed the persistent whispers of suspicion, illustrating how powerful institutions can shape public perception, even when a community's lived experience tells a different story. The efforts to re-examine the evidence, even with modern technologies, face an uphill battle against time and the constraints of preserving evidence for so long. The hope is not just to potentially find new DNA or confirm old links, but to also provide a measure of peace through definitive answers, whatever they may be. It is an acknowledgement that some wounds cannot heal until the full truth, however painful, is brought into the light. This re-examination itself is a testament to the enduring power of the victims' families, whose unwavering commitment ensured that the world would not simply forget and that the questions would continue to be asked. The legacy of the Atlanta child murders is a complex tapestry of grief, fear, official declarations, and enduring skepticism. It is a story of a city brought to its knees by terror, of a community struggling for justice, and of the profound, often painful, interplay between race, crime, and trust in the American South. The conviction of Wayne Williams brought an end to the terror, but it did not bring peace to every heart, nor did it silence every question. The dark shadows of doubt continued to cling to the edges of the official narrative, reminding Atlanta that sometimes, even when a case is declared solved, the chilling essence of the mystery can persist, a haunting echo in the collective memory. The quest for truth, decades later, underscores that some stories refuse to be neatly concluded, their unresolved threads forever weaving into the city's conscience. And you, what do you think truly happened in Atlanta during those horrifying years? Do you believe Wayne Williams was solely responsible for the reign of terror, or do you suspect darker, unaddressed forces were at play, leaving a chilling thread of the mystery unraveling even today?